It's story time. The story begins. Let the words enter your mind. Neurons fire away deep into Imagination Central. There, any adventure can play out. Waves of blooming wildflowers roll in the summer breeze. Butterflies flutter across the field, drifting up into the sky. You build a Persian palace from shadowy memories. Inside, sitting on his ottoman in flowing silk robes, a sultan speaks to his emissary, his eyes drawn thin as he issues a challenge to his people to bring him a riddle he cannot solve. You enter Storyland. Now your heightened focus turns to today's storyteller.
Well, hi there. I'm Santa, and I'm also the Longmont Santa, and I tell stories to the Longmont Spellbinders storytelling group. I tell at fourth grade elementary school over Timberline, and then I also tell at a nursing home. When I'm not doing my devotions, I tell them stories like I did last week. And that's kind of the things that I do. I was always told that I tell a lot of stories by my mother, and so I'm really good at this. Today, I want to tell you a story about a little boy named Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge. This story was written by Mem Fox, who lives in Australia. Well, Wilfred Gordon lived next door to an old folks home, and he wasn't very old either. He liked to go over there and visit with the various people. His favorite was Mrs. Jordan, who played the organ, Mr. Hopkins, who told scary stories, Mr. Tippett, who was crazy about cricket, and Mrs. Mitchell, who walked with a wooden stick, and Mr. Drysdale, who talked like a giant. Well, he got to his favorite person, which was the last one, was Miss Nancy Allison Delacourt Cooper. He was her favorite because she had 4 names just like him. Well, one day, when he was with Miss Nancy, he told her all his secrets. One day he was at home and he was listening to his mother and father. They were talking about Miss Nancy. And Mom was saying, "Oh, poor Miss Nancy. She's lost her memory." His dad says, "Well, she's 96 years old. That happens." So Wilfred Gordon says, "Well, what's a memory?" His dad says, "Well, it's something you remember." So he goes to Mrs. Jordan, who plays the organ, and she says, "It's something that's warm." Mr. Hopkins, who tells scary stories, says it's something that makes you laugh. Mr. Tippett, who's crazy about cricket, it's something that's very old, he says. Mrs. Mitchell, who walks with a wooden stick, says that it's something that helps you just get through life, something you remember. Mr. Drysdale, who speaks like a giant, says it's something that's as precious as gold. So Wilfred Gordon had an idea. He ran home and he gets a basket and he starts putting together some things. First he finds a box of shells, and then he finds an old medal that his grandfather had given to him. And then he finds a string puppet that he used to play with his sister. Then he looked under his bed and he found his football. Well, that was as precious as gold to him. So he put that in the basket, and he's running out the door, and he stops at the hen house first. And he pulls an egg right out from under the hen. It's still warm, and puts it in a basket. And he goes over to see Miss Nancy. And Miss Nancy, he says, "I hear you're losing your memory, and I want to help." So he sets the basket down and pulls one thing out at a time. First, was the warm egg. And she took it and she said, oh, I remember we used to see robin's eggs in the nest next to my aunt's garden. They were speckled and everything, just like this. Then he handed her the box of shells. These are in here in a peculiar way. But, you know, when you're a little guy like Wilfred Gordon, you pack them up as best you can. And she sees these. She says, oh, I remember when we were young, my dad took us to the beach on the tram. It was so hot, I had to take off my high-button shoes just to run around on that sand. And look, she took a shell. I can still hear the ocean. And then he gave her this stringed puppet. And she laughed. And she says, ha, ha, I remember I used to tease my little sister with this when she had a mouthful of porridge, and she'd laugh and it'd go all over the place. It was just so funny. And then he handed her the old war medal, and she touched it, and a tear came to her eye. Oh, my brother, he didn't come back from the war, and this just helps me remember him. And she puts that down, and he gives her the football. She said, ha, ha, ha. She tossed it to him. And she said, because you tell me all your secrets. And so they played with the football. They put everything back, and Wilfred Gordon says, Miss Nancy, we found your memory. Isn't that great? And she was happy. End of story. The other story I have, now you've heard the story of the 3 little pigs and the big bad wolf. That's really not how it went. This is the true story of the big bad wolf and the 3 little pigs. It was about the big bad wolf. He was actually at home one day. He was sick. He had a cold, you know, and he had to make his grandmother a cake because her birthday was tomorrow. Well, he's getting everything all ready to make the cake, and he has no eggs. So he says, well, it's a long ways to go to the store, and I have this cold. So I'll just go to my neighbors. There happen to be 3 pigs, and we haven't really talked much, but I want to go talk to them. So he decides to go to the first pig's house. Well, of course, that house is made of straw, and so he can't knock real loud. And he says, knock, knock, knock. Mr. Pig, this is your neighbor, Mr. Wolf. My friends call me Larry. You can do that. So I need to borrow some eggs. Well, the pig saw him coming, and he'd run upstairs in his straw house. And he's yelling, get away from me, get away from me. And he's stomping and stamping and everything else. And all this stuff's coming up into the wolf's face because it's straw. And what does he do? He sneezes, ha-hoo, and blows the house down. Well, what happened was the little pigs right there in the middle of that straw butt up. And he says, wait a minute, you know, I haven't really eaten, and I can't just let that go. It's a free meal. So he ate the pig. But he still needed some eggs. So he went to the next house, which was the next pig. And it was made of twigs and sticks. And again, he couldn't knock very hard, but he did knock. Knock, knock, knock. Mr. Pig, I'm your neighbor, Mr. Wolf, just down the street. And inside, the pig is yelling. He says, go away, leave me alone. I saw what you did to my brother's house. Mr. Wolf says, wait a minute, wait a minute. That was an accident because of the dust. You can call me Larry. My friends call me Larry. You know, I just need to borrow some eggs. The second pig says, no, go away, leave me alone. And again, all this jumping around caused that sawdust to come up. You know, and what's he do? He sneezes and blows that house down. And what happens again? There's that pig, butt up in the middle of that room. He says, well, I didn't get really full on that first pig. I might as well just eat this one and fill up while the getting's good. One never knows when I'm going to get another, you know, free ham. So he says, I still need the eggs. I just lost that stem, but that's okay. So he goes next door to the other pig's house, the third pig. And of course it's made of bricks. Well, that pig saw what happened to the other two houses. And he's already yelling, go away, leave me alone. And Mr. Wolf couldn't even knock on the door. And he's saying, I just need some eggs. I'm here. I'm sorry about your brothers, but that happens. You know, and so they're yelling back and forth, and he doesn't hear the sirens because this brother had called the cops. And the next thing you know, Mr. Wolf's in jail, holding on to the bars. And he's crying and coughing because he never did get his eggs. And he's the victim here. And he shouldn't have told that reporter, you know, I just needed something for my grandma. And all she wrote was, Big Bad Wolves eats 2 of 3 pigs. End of story. I chose these stories, especially this one about Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge, because it's something that I can tell at the nursing home as well as at the elementary school. I work with Alzheimer's patients in the nursing home, and that's about memory. And I tell them that we all have a memory problem from time to time. There's a gospel song done by Jason Crabb that, you know, he sings about his grandmother. She doesn't remember yesterday, but she remembers 1948. Well, that's how kind of a lot of these things come in. So that helps with the memory, and they get that. The children get the laugh. That's my goal. I just try to get laugh. When I'm telling the Big Bad Wolf story, I sneeze loud, and I get them all jumping out their chairs. You know, and they all know the stories. And I found with the children, if they know that second story, I find one to be the pig, and they have to get down on the floor, be butt up. You know, and they love it. Or I can't tell a story where they don't know most of what I'm going to tell, so I make them participate. Or my last story of the year is my running story, where I start out over here, and I start out with Once Upon a Time, and then I'll go with each child, and I don't call my students kids, because I ask early on in the year if any of them are goats, because goats are kids, you know, baby goats. So none of them are goats, so I call them children, ladies and gentlemen, or by their name. And so anyway, we'll start this story, and this person will add something, I'll recite it. Then this person write down the first 4 or 5 children, and we'll recite as we go along. Then I see who can recite this the whole way. And we have 26 students in the class. And about the 5th time, I find somebody that can do this. Now last year when I did it, I had 3 really good, strong storytellers. And the 4th class, I kind of worried because the 2 that we thought would be strong storytellers weren't. They didn't volunteer. What volunteered was this little guy who sat in front that had 2 hearing aids. And he did a fantastic job. And we got through all of the stories with the teacher saying, the end. But he could recite everything that went on. The trick is to point at each one so you can remember who said what, or get some derivation to get the gist of the story. And that's a crazy thing, and that takes about 30 minutes to do that whole story. But it's probably my most fun story that I like to do with children.